Hi, welcome back to Frazzled Dad's Minis. I'm Jim, Frazzled Dad. In last week's episode that I dropped, I gave you the top 3 tips for guaranteeing wins at competitions and nailing great commissions. Oh, fuck. Wait a minute. I haven't dropped a video since late January 2025. It's been a year. So yeah, I've had some things going on and I've been away a while. Lots of reasons behind that. Life stuff going on. You can see that I'm in a different space. My young adult daughter moved back in while she's going to college here in the town that I'm in. I had to move my workspace. The workspace is great to work in. It's a pain in the ass to record in. Blah, 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 right? I could have solved those problems if I would have cared to. I had some significant health stuff going on in my family. One of my sisters had 2 different cancer surgeries. I had my own cancer surgery where I got a chunk of my arm taken out because I was a dumbass and ignored a spot on my skin for years. Don't be like me. Don't be a dumbass. Pay attention to your health. Anyway, my sister's doing great. She's awesome. I'm doing fine. I'm back throwing heavy weights around. So there was life stuff going on. Also, I just got burned out. I was not successful at growing the channel as I'd hoped, even to hit small monetization. I'm minuscule, right? I'm not even tiny. I'm not small. I'm not tiny. I'm minuscule. But it's a crowded space. It's tough to get exposure. Each and every one of you that's subscribed, I greatly appreciate you. And if you're new and aren't subscribed, kindly click the subscribe link. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing regular videos, but I'm probably going to be doing somewhat infrequent drops. And I'd like to think with my brain reset, I've got new and interesting takes on my niche of the hobby craft. The bigger issue is, though, that I got burned out. I had struggled to meet my own overly high expectations around improvement in skin and NMM, particularly 2 really vital, for me, skills to be at a moderate to high level. Folks get burned out in any number of things. So I just pulled back. I did other things. I played with my dogs. I focused on weightlifting, and I had a couple pretty good personal records. I did a lot of cooking. I spent time at my family cabin in the mountains and read some light reading. Thomas Sowell is not light reading. Awesome, but very heavy. Anyway, part of the year was just letting me reset my brain, and that was much needed. It's not like I was working for a living doing painting stuff, so I had other stuff going on with like the charity work that I do and volunteer work that I do in my family. And it was fine to just head off in a different direction. I did get a few things done, and I gradually started getting back into things that I was careful about setting boundaries around to make sure it was fun and productive. I painted up like 60 or 70 figures from the Stalker board game, which, oh my God, they are glorious figures. I was in on the Kickstarter. If you run across that game, absolutely worth a grab. I did a couple big stompy things. I started painting King Cthulhu, I think, from Spira Mirabilis, which I totally had forgotten on my shelf over there. You can't see it, but I've got a shelf over there with figures. And I was chill enough about that it was fun. And then I got my Kickstarter drop of Ultracryl paints. I'll talk more about them. Lots of good things, a couple significant bads, but overall, holy smokes, they're glorious paints. And I was painting up yet another box set of Cthulhu Death May Die. This is the Season 4 expansion. And I'd gotten partway through with other paints, but then the Ultracryl dropped, and I dropped all the other paints and just focused on Ultracryl. And so I was like, oh, this will give me a good chance to speak about having worked with the Ultracryl paints for a couple weeks on several different figures. And, yay and verily, here we are. Am I going to be dropping videos again regularly? I don't know. Maybe it's probably not going to be weekly like it was in the past. It might be. Could be. Don't know. But, part of this is also getting back into the enjoyment of actually building content. Recording's kind of a pain in the ass. I stutter a lot. There are a whole fucking lot of outtakes because of profanity, and coughing and whatnot. But I enjoy the editing process. It's fun kind of grabbing together music clips and doing some of the stuff. So we'll see how it goes. Again, I greatly appreciate those of you who've been subscribers and followers, and I appreciate even more those of you who've interacted with me in comments. The miniature painting space on YouTube, Instagram, social medias, all this stuff is very crowded with a whole lot of epic, amazing painters, right? El Miniaturista Juan Sanchez, whatever his name is, Angel Heraldez. There are extraordinary people who are great at helping level up, and I'm never going to be one of them. So trying to find a spot that I can do something interesting while I am learning and leveling up my own skills. I'm not going to make money doing this, but I am resetting my brain to figure out what'll be fun. Okay, enough nattering on. Let's get to my list of things from the Ultracryl paint set. So these are a bunch of things that are on a nasty piece of paper that I wrote down during the week and a half, 2 weeks that I was working, focused only on those paints. I'll give you bullet points, and then I'll go into deeper discussion during the actual painting clips over at the workstation. So first off, the cons. And the first con I'll actually talk to a bit here. Please be very, very clear. I love the Ultracryl paints. I hope the company succeeds, but one of the big cons during the execution of the Kickstarter was it's very apparent that the tiny team of paint chemists, right? I don't know the right term, but it's very apparent these folks are wicked smart at paint chemistry and figuring out how to produce the paints. They're awesome at that. They are not great, and I'm being kind, at execution and communication. They themselves have admitted on their on the Kickstarter updates and in their Discord when I was in there, I had to leave because I just got too frustrated, that communicating back to people is not a high priority. There's a lot of confusing messages that come around. There were logistic mistakes and situations with workflow and capacity, and it was obvious that they didn't have an experienced business person or a good program manager. So there were lots of just weird things going on and bad communication. That's really frustrating. I'm not the smartest person. I was not the smartest person during my career in IT, but I learned early on about the importance of communication. I hope they get that fixed, because the paints are freaking glorious. And I want to see their paints on the shelf at my local game store. It's over that way, not that way. So I hope they get that fixed up. But that takes a mindset that's open to feedback and open to self-evaluation about improving things. The folks are pleasant. They're kind, I think. And holy shit, did they make awesome paints. Okay, now on to the bullet points. Still in the con category, the bottle's form factor, specifically the form factor, height, width, and the child-proof tops. I'll talk more about those. That's the only two cons. Positives. Holy freaking cow. Pigments and colors are glorious. The bottles, going back to the bottles, pluses about the bottles is great label information. The bottles are very clear so you can see the wet paint. There is a square on the bottles that you can paint over so you can see the dried paint color. And they made the square with a grid of black and white. So you see the opacity. You see how it looks over white. You see how it looks over black. That's freaking brilliant. The dropper tips, oh my God, they're glorious. Talked about the pigments. Consistency is not a problem, but it's watery and you'll have to get used to it. And it's not watery in a bad way. You just have to get used to it. Some of the paints dry really, really quickly. Like on the wet palette, I'd be surprised at how fast they dry out. A couple of the other paints, yellows and whites, are very, I think the right word is hygroscopic. Somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. They pick up a lot of moisture. So overnight, if I had the cover on regardless whether the cover was on the wet palette or not, those particular paints were unusable the next day, except maybe as a glaze or a wash with mediums. It's not a problem because you can use that dropper tip to put in tiny amounts and just refresh. I mentioned using as glaze or wash. Every paint that I worked with using my favorite medium, which is Monument Hobbies glaze wash medium, which is just a glorious product. All of them worked really well with that. The color ranges are fantastic. The browns are, and there's not a lot of browns. All of the browns seem somewhat reddish. That's not a big problem. They're just very few. They lean red. I can go to any one of my other paint sets and find good browns that are more neutral or cold. So it's not a problem. It's just something to be aware of. The greens and reds, oh my God, they're glorious. There's a huge range of greens. I'm looking over at my paint rack over here. I bet there are 6, 12, 12-ish, 15-ish greens. There's only 3 yellows. The yellows are awesome. The reds are all pretty warm reds. The violets are glorious. And I love that because previously my favorite violets had been Broken Anvil Minis. But fuck those people. That particular set of violets from Broken Anvil is terrific. But I'm very happy mentally to be able to get rid of those and get those paints off my rack because the whole Broken Anvil mess is just vile. And so it's just bad karma, bad energy. And I get mad, go figure, looking at the paints and I just want to get them off of my rack. So anyway, back to the positive factor. These Ultracryl paints, violets, are glorious. The metals, I've only used 3, gold, silver, and platinum. And they worked really, really well. They're beautiful colors. They coat. It's kind of a one-coat metal, which is nice. I'm looking forward to playing with them more. I only used them on accents for a couple pieces. Enough of that. I talked about them instead of just doing bullet points. Let's go paint. So here I'm starting to work on one of the beasties. Can't remember the name. I'm laying down a base coat using cobalt green. A quick word about the primer. I've started using Molotow black, and holy smokes, this stuff is great. It does gunk up an airbrush. You have to work really hard at cleaning it after a spray session, but I love how well this stuff covers. It's really glorious. Anyway, to the Ultracryl. So this is my first real work with these paints, and I'm using a big ass brush, trying to get good coverage. This is finding out how to work with the dilution to get the right consistency and get some good coverage. It's going to take me a couple coats to get everything where I want it, but the paint is flowing really well, and you can see right here already that the pigmentation is pretty extraordinary. So this is just getting stuff down. Apologies if there's some odd clicks or whatever in my voice. I'm having to suck on a cough drop while I'm doing this. I'm still getting over that cold of mine, and yeah, my cough's bad. Anyway, I'm putting down a wash over that green base coat. I love the combination of a green and a violet when I'm doing spooky skin stuff. So here I'm playing with quinacridone magenta transparent, whatever, look it up. It's a mono pigment. Don't really know all that much about it, but this stuff is going on really lovely. Continuing to learn a bit more about working with dilution of the paints. The first two that I've dealt with, they're just slightly different. They're a bit more watery than you'd expect. They're not anywhere near a heavy-bodied acrylic like Chimera or a scale color. They're not creamy like P3 paints. You just need to deal with it. Again, it's not a bad thing. It's just learning how to work with this stuff. It's all getting the reps in. I'm really enjoying how this stuff lays down, and I'm really happy with the end result of it. The wash has dried and hardened. I left it a bit longer than I would otherwise. I'm dry brushing over a mix of greens to bring the skin detail back up. These figures have a lot of great folds, and I want to make sure that that wash is apparent down in the depths, and then the green of the skin is apparent at the highlights. So I'm using a dry brush from Rosemary & Co. They have great brushes. And here I'm working through a mix of cobalt green, which was the base, olive green, which is a slightly lighter tone, but almost also kind of a army camo light green, and then also adding in bits of ochre yellow. And I'm just working on scrubbing all this to get all of these three beasties highlighted. I like blocking out eyes early on. It just helps me get a better feel for the figure. Here I'm using titanium buff which is kind of a lovely ivory-ish off-white. There's a little bit of color to it. Looks really nice. The paint works really well. It's a bit thicker than the others. Again, this is just learning the range. Good stuff. Now I'm using a regular brush and the same colors that I used in dry brushing, but I'm really trying to bring in some of the lighting. So the light source from all of these is generally to the front, above, and to the viewer's right, the figure's left. And I'm just hitting the brush to pick out even more details and really try to make the lighting pop from that direction. Onto the cool tentacles. Normally, I tend to paint tentacles like violets and dark greens, and I wanted to try something different here. So I pulled out some of the cool reds and the yellows, and I love the ranges there. That oxide red is one of my new favorite reds. It's kind of this brownish yellow, glorious red. The yellows that I listed there are also terrific. Again, the pigmentation is just top-notch. Coverage is terrific. And I'm able to do some modest wet blending. I didn't work all that hard at it, but it was just easy. The paint came off the brush great. And holy smokes, I'm really, really happy with how things are looking. That's bright, it's vibrant. I managed to get what I think is a good kind of creepy blend in there. Yeah, very happy. The reds and the yellows, big thumbs up from me. These heffalumps, that's not what they're really called. I call them that from the Winnie the Pooh books, have these interesting bumps on their body, and I wanted to turn those into pustules. I was actually trying to kind of mimic almost a Nurgle look with both a skin tone and then these pustules. And I didn't come really close, but it was fun to use that as inspiration. Anyway, back to this boy. I'm using transparent magenta again, and I'm really liking that color. And it's fascinating because while it is transparent, there's great pigment and some opacity. It's this kind of mind-blowing blend, but it's fun to play with. So I'll use this as kind of a base to highlight and get color on these. Later on, I'll actually use Citadel Blood of the Blood God, which is just that glorious technical effects paint to give them kind of a wet, gloopy look. But the transparent magenta alone is fantastic, and I'm really enjoying working with it. Now I'm on to working on the woozles. If you know your Winnie the Pooh, you have heffalumps, you have woozles. Anyway, I had painted these with, I think, the bright Indian yellow and then that cobalt green, I think, again. Gotten some really interesting transitions there. I used a Citadel wash. I think it was sepia, seraphim sepia, one of those. It really brought all of the colors down as I intended. And now I'm going back with that bright Indian yellow to catch the highlights and again provide some of that, zenithal upper right front lighting. The yellow dry brushes really well. There's some interesting experimentation about, again, learning to deal with the consistency of it, but I didn't really have to dampen my brush much when doing this. It was just load up the brush, scrub some off, and get after it. And I was really happy with what I got out of this. The yellows are they're beautiful. Now it's on to actually working some skin tones, and this big box set had a specific range of skin paints, 1 through 5. 5 is a very interesting black. I think I've talked about it maybe a little bit. It's very dark, and it seems like there might be a tint of blue in there. I don't know color theory, paint theory well. It just seemed like when I tried mixing in some other colors to get some variation on this dark-skinned character, I'd end up with like green results. This is me learning more about paint and learning more about these. Regardless, all of these paints covered really, really well. In this particular box set, there are 6 characters, and I broke them up into sort of 3 groups. One very dark, one mid-tone, and then one group of 2 that were very pale. And I really enjoyed the paints here. Got good results, got really good coverage, was able to mix and blend things pretty well. I wish I'd shown more of the palette as I was blending things, but everything combined well. I wasn't overly pleased with the result of this black-skinned character. I redid it a couple times. That's not the fault of the paint. That's me having to figure out how to work with it better. And dark skin stuff is tough. I had one piece that I worked on for several months trying to get a better understanding of how to paint dark skin. But great paints. Really loved what I got with these for results. There it is. I hope that was useful. I had a lot of fun doing these pieces. Again, I just love the Death May Die series. I know that Simon has kind of an up and down reputation. I backed another one of their projects, Zombicide, and there was some drama about delivery with that. But with Cthulhu Death May Die, I can tell you that you can walk into any local game store or go to any retail site, buy a box set, and you can be 100% certain that the quality of the materials is going to be kick-ass, the figures are going to be beautiful, and you're going to have a great time dying a whole lot while you figure out how to not die, and then eventually figure out how to win each of the episodes. Anyway, it's hard for me to express how much I love the games. Also, there's a very deep emotional part there for the connection with my son. Some of you may know my family situation. It's complicated. So anything that I can sit down and really just lose track of the world and have 11 hours over a weekend with my son to do nothing but just roll dice and scream in frustration because we're getting our asses kicked. Anyway, it's very special stuff. If you like mystical, dark stuff with amazing character figures, look up some Death May Die. You'll be happy. Anyway, also Ultracryl. I hope they figure out their production business issues, because I can't emphasize this enough. I want them on the shelf at my local game shop. It's glorious paints, and I want to see them succeed. I had a great time painting with them. Enough more blabber. Grand reveal. There you have it. Done with an episode. I'd apologize for being off for a year, but, you folks don't owe me anything. I needed some space. I appreciate your patience. Yeah, I will say, the world's a weird place, and it has been for a long time. If one of your online pals or your real life pals withdraws or goes dark, check in on them. I'm very fortunate, right? I was never in a dark place. I've been there in the past. I've been open about some of that. This time, though, I was not in a bad place. I withdrew because of all the stuff I talked about. Point being, if you see somebody or, withdraw, get dark, go quiet, just check in on them. Be a mensch, be a good human, be a good friend. Regardless of that, if you made it this far, thank you. I'd love a subscribe if you're not already. I'd appreciate a thumbs up if you like the comments. If you like the content, let me know in the comments what you thought about this. It's good to be back. Until next time, experiment, do something fun. Don't kill yourself. Instead, remember that this hobby is supposed to be fun. Learn something, experiment. Remember, at the end of the day, it's just paint and plastic. Until next time, ciao, tschüss, sayonara, auf Wiedersehen. Yeah, whatever. Bye.